Assassin's Creed Origins is a game changer, literally and figuratively, but I suppose mostly literally. In 2017, Assassin's Creed wasn't necessarily dying, but it was certainly on decline, and more importantly, it had almost entirely lost its cultural cachet and prestige. After a full decade of non-stop releases, there was a general impression that the series had accomplished everything it could creatively, and from now on it would just be diminishing returns. This wasn't held by a previous few years of failures: Unity's legendary failure to launch, Syndicate's lower than expected sales, the total nothing impressions of the Chronicles games, and a live-action movie which was one of the biggest critical and commercial bombs of 2016. This is what makes Assassin's Creed Origins quite so remarkable. It did the impossible. It revived public interest in Assassin's Creed and kept the franchise chugging along for another decade. It was an incredible risk. It changed the bones of Assassin's Creed. It is a fundamentally different game to anything that had come before, and typical advice would be that this kind of change should be avoided because gamers hate change. But as our old friend Charles Darwin might say, adapt or die. Sometimes the only thing that can save a long-running series from creative stagnation is a total ground-up reimagining of what the series even is in the first place. Assassin's Creed Origins changed Assassin's Creed, and in doing so, it became one of the best and most successful games in the series. This is a bit of a full circle moment for me, because Assassin's Creed Origins is actually the first video I ever reviewed on this channel, all the way back in 2017 when I had no idea what I was doing. Seriously, it's bad. Don't watch it. You cannot possibly do justice to Assassin's Creed Origins in a 10-minute video that's mostly really bad jokes. Origins is one of the most important games in the series, and the start of what I would consider to be the modern era of Assassin's Creed, what one of my commenters recently referred to as the 100+ hour kaleidoscopic ARPG era, which I think is perfect. It's also a very good game, don't misconstrue me. It started off an entire era by being a fantastic game, even if it does have some pretty serious shortcomings. Origins is a soft reboot of the franchise, but unlike what that means for a movie franchise, resetting the story with new characters and instead it's a mechanical reboot, taking the series from action-adventure to a full-on action RPG with all of that entails, brand new mechanics for almost every system along with a bunch of new systems to boot. It also turns back the clock way back to around 1,000 years before the first game, around the end of the BCs. There were 3 settings that were always requested for Assassin's Creed: feudal Japan, World War II, and ancient Egypt. Basically the 2 that everyone studied in high school, and then one for the weeps. But while it's a soft reboot, it's also an origin story, as the name may imply, the origins of the Assassin's Creed. Because while the name may have come from the Hashashin of Masyaf, the organisation itself is actually much, much older. Threading that line between bringing in new players and appeasing old players is a very fine line to walk, a line that gets thinner and thinner as time goes on. But all things considered, Origins walks that line as well as it possibly could. But there's a lot to talk about before we get to that, and I don't want to spend any more time waffling because, oh boy, this is going to be a long one. So, without further ado, let's talk about Assassin's Creed Origins. Assassin's Creed Origins is the story of Bayek of Siwa, the Last Medjay, an order of ancient warriors sworn to protect the Pharaoh and the people of Egypt. Beliefs that would eventually evolve into Bayek, along with his wife Aya, forming the Assassin Brotherhood. It takes a long time to get there though, and to start with, Bayek's motivations are as personal as can be, because, wouldn't you know it, it's about revenge. But Origins does not give you all of the information right out of the gate. We cut from a tranquil scene of Siwa celebrating the arrival of the Pharaoh to an incredibly dark and brutal scene of a dishevelled and more than a little insane-looking Bayek murdering a man and scratching his name off a list that he has tattooed on his arm.
You see this? I can read my own name, Nat! We will find you. We will find you. In your sleep! Sleep? I never sleep. I just wait in the shadows, and I will kill you all. Everyone who sniffed the air that day in Siwa!
When I first played the game, this intro caught me quite off guard, because compared to everything in the series before, it is significantly more brutal in a heightened, hyper-violent sort of way. It feels like a scene out of a Tarantino movie. In retrospect though, it sets accurate expectations for the game to come. Origins is a much darker game that explores much darker themes. It's a more mature game than the ones that came before, aiming for a slightly more mature audience, and the graphic brutality is very much a part of the new tone. It also poses a significant question. What on earth could drive a man to these extremes? Contrary to what you might think, Bayek is not a sociopath. In fact, as you soon learn, Bayek is one of the friendliest, most personable protagonists in the whole series. What could cause such a nice man to snap quite so badly? The first few hours of the game tease out that revelation while also revealing the new structure of the game and all the new bells and whistles. Bayek has come back to Siwa after a year away hunting that man in the tomb, because another of his targets is back in Siwa as well. Origins hits you with a ton of changes right out of the gate, throwing you immediately into the new combat system, then the new traversal system, then the new stealth systems and RPG mechanics. I'm not kidding when I say that nothing has been carried over from the previous games. Siwa is Bayek's home, but it's also here to get the player up to speed on what's going on with the gameplay before throwing them into the rest of the game. The biggest change to the game is arguably the structure of the story. Origins is built around region-by-region exploration. You'll ride into a new town where you're met with various main and side quests, and then when you're finished or just get bored, you ride into the next town. It's a totally different approach than the previous games, which are built around specific locations, which you generally come back to over and over again. Syndicate was set in the city of London. Origins is set in the entire country of Egypt. It's just a completely different scale of world design. At the turn of the new millennium, Egypt was in a very strange place culturally. The current pharaohs, the Ptolemies, were not Egyptian, they were Greek, and in general Egypt was a huge melting pot of cultures, with Greeks especially holding a place of cultural dominance, something which comes up again and again across the game world, including right at the start in Siwa. Siwa is separated from the rest of Egypt, both geographically and culturally, being surrounded by desert on all sides. It holds on to older traditions and a smaller community, but it's now under occupation by the Ptolemaic soldiers. Bayek is a bit of a local hero in Siwa. He knows everyone and everyone knows him. It's a welcoming atmosphere for the game to begin in and gives a clear impression of who Bayek is when he's not murdering people in tombs. He loves to smile, he loves to help people, he abhors injustice and exploitation, and he's absolutely great with kids. All of the early side quests in Siwa are built to bring out these qualities in Bayek. It's not until he reaches his target, the man behind this new occupation of Siwa, that the darkness and brutality comes back, and that we finally learn what it is that caused Bayek to begin his hunt. An extended flashback shows what happened a year ago when a group of strange masked figures kidnapped him and caused the death of his son, Kemu, by his own hand. Revenge is hardly new for the series, particularly revenge for the death of a family member, but of all of them, Bayek's story hits the hardest because the death of parents and brothers just doesn't hit the same as the death of your own child. There's an extended sequence before the moment showing that Kemu was a great kid and that Bayek was a fantastic dad. He was great at it and he loved nothing more than being a dad. He's a man who loves deeply, and that's what makes him capable of such overwhelming brutality when it's all taken away. Bayek is one of the best, maybe the actual best protagonist in the series. Multi-layered, incredibly likeable and sincere, yet shrouded in darkness and deep sadness that lurks just behind the eyes. And the way the game weaves between all of these aspects of his character across its sprawling runtime is truly masterful work. And yet at the same time, Bayek isn't really the main character of Origins in the same way as some of the previous protagonists of the series, and I think that's best demonstrated by the game's box art. The Assassin's Creed games have a box art format they've stuck to since the first game, with the main characters standing cool with their hood front and centre. But on the front of Origins, Bayek is just a tiny part of the greater frame, because as much as he is the main character, the star of Origins is Egypt itself. I cannot undersell just how big Assassin's Creed Origins is. Some of the previous games were big, but Assassin's Creed Origins is big. It would take almost 3 hours of walking to cross it its longest distance, and every single step of that journey will be absolutely gorgeous and right around the corner from something to do. And not only is it big, it's rich with detail and depth in both the environmental design and the game design in a way that the previous games weren't really aiming for, aside from maybe Assassin's Creed Unity. It's the RPG mechanics that make the biggest experiential difference to the game. To put it simply, Origins is the most video gamey of all of the Assassin's Creed so far. It's completely abandoned the idea of combat being a tool of immersion and introduces a system with some real mechanical depth. A system that it's actually possible to be bad at. The only other game that really tried was Unity, but Unity just took the old Assassin's Creed combat and tried to jury-rig it into an RPG system. Origins rebuilds everything from scratch. Origins combat is built around light and heavy attack combos across a wide variety of different weapon types. You also, by standard, have a shield to block attacks and parry blows. It's a much more direct style of combat than the previous game's duck and weave style of combat. You can still do that as well, in fact there's some weapons built around it, but as a rule, enemies are aggressive and fast, and so you're always on your toes. Instead of the auto-locky mechanics that have you bouncing around enemies, there's an optional lock-on akin to the Souls-like games, but you can also free-farm it and attack in any direction you're aiming. This change alone makes the whole thing feel a lot more in your control than previous entries. Ranged combat is also much more of a focus, with a wide variety of bows available with different functions that are able to be pulled out at any moment and are aimed equally as freely with no lock-ons. Although depending on your playstyle, the bows may be more useful in stealth. The Predator bow specifically is a long-range weapon designed to do maximum silent damage from range. You do still have your trusty hidden blade, but in general there's a much bigger focus in stealth placed on ranged gameplay over the traditional sneak up and stab everyone approach. This is the foundation of the RPG mechanics, which includes a skill tree full of things to learn to enhance your combat, like powerful moves that charge up as you fight, as well as other skills for the stealth and exploration side of the pyramid. Then there's the entire gear system, akin to something like Diablo, with different rarities and levels across your weapons. The bulk of what you find in the open world from chests is gear, so as you're going through the game, you're constantly on the hunt for better and better quality gear to keep up with the enemy levels and power. The highest levels of gear also have bonus abilities that will make them more unique, like always being on fire or having instant charge heavy attacks, which can be a real game changer to your combat strategies. This is a fairly big pivot away from historical authenticity because magic swords that are always on fire are a bit of a weird anachronism, but it's a sacrifice towards gameplay that I'm personally okay with making. The map is split into large zones that have a suggested level. Higher level enemies will shred you pretty instantly and stealth won't be much help to you either. This is primarily a concession to the narrative since these level boundaries keep you broadly penned into where you're supposed to be in the main story and keep things a little tidier from a play experience. Considering the scale of the map, you don't ever feel penned in, because even these smaller zones are still as big as the entire map of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. This isn't necessarily a better approach than the previous games, it's just a fundamentally different approach to the entire game. It's a much more stuff-driven focus that gives individual locations on the map a much more specific gameplay purpose. You're always on the hunt for stuff. The bigger the enemy outpost, the better the chances of the good stuff. One change I personally love, but was quite controversial at the time, is the game's more literal interpretation of eagle vision. Instead of having magic X-ray vision, Bayek has a pet eagle, Senu, which you can use to scout out locations and tag enemies, chests, and other points of interest. This was a little bit controversial because, like the magic swords, it's pretty loose on the realism side of things to have a telepathic connection to a bird. But I don't personally think that it's any more silly than having the magic X-ray vision. I do think it's a lot more fun though and manages to make the scouting part of a stealth infiltration a mechanically interesting part of the experience. And also just gives you a lovely bird's eye view of the surrounding landscape. I've talked a lot in previous games about the overlap between Assassin's Creed and the cozy game genre, but these mechanical changes are enough to bump Origins out of that category. It's no longer a game that you can expect anyone could pick up and have a good time with. It requires a level of commitment to learning game systems and paying attention to numbers that previous games, not even previous games with similar systems like Syndicate, really required of you. The game is challenging sometimes, even for me, and I'm a pro gamer boy. And actual difficulty is not something the series has ever really tried before, at least not well. As much as I love some of the older games, I cannot deny that on a minute-to-minute basis, Origins is a lot more mechanically engaging. It's a core gameplay loop that's engaging enough to sustain 100 plus hours. There are also drawbacks to this approach. The biggest one is the amount of time you spend faffing around on the inventory screen, an unavoidable part of any game with this kind of gear system, which I don't love. And of course, 100 hours with any gameplay loop is a big ask without any variation. Luckily, anything that Origins lacks in gameplay variation, it more than makes up for in environmental variation. Origins is the game that taught me just how versatile a setting a desert can actually be. From the classic sandy dunes across the horizon, to the rocky canyons and plateaus, to the mountains of black rock and gravel, to the splashes of green around the banks of the Nile. Every region of Origins Egypt has a distinct environmental feeling as well as a distinct cultural feeling. Some major cities, like Alexandria, are dominated by Greek culture and architecture. Others, like Memphis, the capital of the Old Kingdom, are much more rooted in ancient Egyptian styles and culture. These settings also spawn quests related to the local problems of these places. As you go far up the northwest corner of the map, you start to feel like you've walked into an entirely different game as the Roman city of Cyrene spreads the influence of the empire. Not every place on the map has stuff in it. True to the real Egypt, some regions are just miles and miles of empty desert. No people, no animals, just you and the scorching sun. But these are still some of the most interesting places to explore in the game just because of that alone. But also because as you spend too long under the desert sun, it will start to mess with your mind, causing mirages and other strange hallucinations. In an interview with Eurogamer, creative director Arsif Ismail talked about the difference between exploration and discovery. How previous games had a great sense of exploration, particularly Black Flag, which was his previous game, but not a great sense of discovery. Origins, on the other hand, is all about that sense of discovery. Egypt is really, really, really old. We consider Bayek's time over 2,000 years ago to be ancient, but the pyramids of Giza were already 3,000 years old by the time that Bayek lived. Even if Bayek himself is part of an ancient civilization, it's not even the oldest civilization to live in Egypt, and the ruins and temples of these even older civilizations dot the landscape. That's where the sense of wonder and discovery comes in. Plenty of areas on the map have no enemies, just a treasure chest or two to find in some lonely spire atop a mountain in the middle of nowhere. But what a sight to find anyway, what a place to be! Even if the game isn't technically a cozy game anymore, the sense of discovery across the map is more than enough to keep up those cozy vibes. Some locations are even just a place to sit for a moment and meditate on the world around you. And of course, the series still has its eponymous viewpoints. It taps into the same vein as something like Skyrim, seeing a map marker on your compass and deciding to head towards it with no idea and no expectation of what you'll find there other than the fact that it'll be either mechanically rewarding with a new weapon, or just environmentally rewarding with a cool new temple or vista. Oftentimes it's both. All of these things come together with the narrative side of things to create a culminative experience that is genuinely amazing. The wandering hero across all of Egypt. It's also pretty much nothing like any of the previous games, beyond the most surface level comparisons of walking around in third person. Which begs the age-old question, is this even Assassin's Creed anymore if it's a foundationally different game? There was certainly a bit of that when the game first came out, but ultimately it's the next game in the series that got hit with that particular question a lot harder. And I think that's really just down to the superficial elements. Even with all of these changes, you're still a dude wandering around in a white hood stabbing people with a hidden blade. Okay, that's a little reductionist of me. Origins does still carry the lineage of the previous games on its shoulders. After all, it's the origin of the assassins. The reason all the assassins wear white hoods and carry hidden blades is because of Bayek. They're all dressing like him and his wife Aya, who we finally meet when Bayek makes it to Alexandria. Aya is the second most important character in the game. She even has several playable missions of her own, which we'll get into later. She's also been off hunting and has killed 2 targets of her own, leaving only 1 left on their list. This is when Bayek picks up the hidden blade and does what most of us would realistically do with one if we got it, and accidentally cuts off his own finger with it. In Assassin's Creed 1, this was a loyalty ritual that Altair did away with, and the revelation that it all started from an accident is kind of funny, but also an interesting bit of commentary on the way the beliefs and rituals morph and change over time. The assassins of the first game, after all, were not the perfect good guys they went on to be in later titles. They had some weirdness to them, and Origins does its part to set up that weirdness as well. After killing his final target is really when the bulk of the game begins, because Bayek and Aya have accidentally stumbled across a much greater conspiracy than they thought. The Order of the Ancients, the organisation later to be known as the Templar Order. They've been working in the shadows to destabilise Egypt for nefarious purposes, and because of that have managed to draw the ire of a certain rebel queen, Cleopatra. Medjay are supposed to serve a pharaoh, and since the Order support Ptolemy, Bayek and Aya swear service to a new pharaoh instead, his sister. This is not the same as the Assassins in Unity and Syndicate's weird turn as monarchists, because the Assassins don't exist yet. Bayek and Aya are just 2 people trying to do good and trying to get revenge for their son. They don't quite understand yet what supporting Cleopatra means for them. And the game's depiction of Cleopatra is excellent. Far from the sexy seductress of old Hollywood, she's clearly one of the most intelligent characters in the game, able to press all the right buttons and say all the right things to convince Bayek, and especially Aya, that she's on the up and up and represents the best possible future for Egypt. She's also a woman who literally considers herself the reincarnation of a goddess, as many pharaohs did. Cleopatra's betrayal of the two would-be assassins can be spoiled either if you know anything about this period of history and what happens to Egypt over the next several decades, or if you remember all the way back to the treasure room in Assassin's Creed 2, where one of the famous assassins of history standing next to Altair was a lady called Amunet, who apparently killed Cleopatra with a snake. But for now at least, she seems to be on the up and up, and she gives Bayek 4 new targets, 4 new members of the Order across Egypt to track down and eliminate. And this is where the region-by-region structure of the game feels at its best. Each target is causing their own brand of chaos, leaving destruction and misery in their wake. There's a great crossover between a lot of the main and side quests, where often the side quests are also dealing with and making blows against the region's target and their plans. In Memphis, for example, a curse has supposedly fallen over the city, everything reeks of death. People are getting sick, and the sacred bull is dying. Some of these issues are resolved in the main quest, but some of them are side quests. The idea is that while you're in the region, you're working on all of these things at once. Curses and rituals come up a lot across the main and side content, which gets into another very important aspect of Bayek, which is that he is deeply religious. To us, the gods of Egypt with their animal heads and the like are just a strange ancient mythology. But to Bayek, and most of the people of Egypt at the time, they're a fact of life. Real, tangible forces who curse people for blasphemy. This gives the game another significant contrast from all the previous games because the assassins are, for all intents and purposes, an atheist group. Something tells me that Ezio isn't a practicing Catholic. In Origins, matters of faith and ritual are given just as much importance as matters of the physical. Death and the beliefs and rituals around it, for example, were hugely important to the ancient Egyptians, and that's reflected in Bayek's beliefs and actions. Many quests in the game revolve around making sure that people are buried properly with the correct ritual mummification process to ensure that their ka, their soul, makes it safely to the afterlife. And in contrast, Bayek specifically refuses that honour to his targets, believing that their souls are too heavy and will not be passing on to the Field of Reeds, the paradise that awaits all those with a pure soul. Instead, he bids them the greeting of the Hidden One, Amunet, the Eater of Hearts. This is actually how the game ties in the feather that Altair used to mark his kills back in the first game. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, when you die, your heart is weighed on a scale by Osiris against the white feather of Ma'at, harmony. If your heart is heavier than the feather, then no peaceful afterlife for you. Your heart is devoured by Amunet and you are doomed to a state of non-existence, which Egyptians considered worse than death. Over the years, as the assassins moved away from Egypt, the symbolism behind the feather might have changed, but the symbol itself remained. Whether these beliefs are real or not is irrelevant. Bayek believes that they are real and acts accordingly. It's a particularly interesting limitation of the Animus that the games have never really explored before. The Animus claims to be an unbiased view of history, but whoever said that our memories are unbiased? Our beliefs shape our perception of reality. If Bayek believes that the gods are real, that a crocodile-headed man rules the Nile and created crocodiles in his image, then in his memories, Sobek is real and dangerous when angry, even if most people living today would probably disagree. One of the strangest sequences in the game happens in Memphis when Bayek participates in a seer's ritual hoping to help a pregnant woman avoid a 4th miscarriage. Bayek blacks out in the fumes and has a vision in which he fights against the great serpent Apep in a sequence roughly analogous to the journey of Ra. Whether this is a real vision of the serpent or a drug-fueled fever dream is totally irrelevant because Bayek believes it was real. If not a literal real event, then a message from the gods that is full of meaning and symbolism to him. The assassins of all of the previous games have always been somewhat separate from their own cultures. By the very nature of the assassins and the old maxim, nothing is true, everything is permitted. Assassins don't follow the laws and beliefs of gods or mortals. They see through such things, and that keeps them separated from their own cultures. This is useful from a writing perspective because it means that the main character of the games is never too alien from what people are used to, but it also gives Origins a much more culturally immersive atmosphere than any of the previous games. Bayek doesn't just live in ancient Egypt, he is a part of ancient Egypt. It gives a much more personal edge to many quests in the game because the non-native Greeks and Romans have their own beliefs and their own gods which they are trying to impose on Egypt, converting some of the temples to Egyptian gods into temples for their own gods instead. The purest form of sacrilege in the eyes of the Egyptians, including Bayek. The tension between the Egyptians and the outsiders is framed much more from this cultural perspective than it is from a more traditional political perspective. There's plenty of exploitation as well, don't get me wrong. The Roman Empire was one of the most famous slave states in human history after all, and that is reflected in-game. But the real risk of a Roman occupation of Egypt is clearly that it would mean the death of Bayek's culture and the death of his gods. It's not that Bayek wants to kick them out or anything. Harmony and balance are an important part of the Egyptian belief structure. He wants to create a world where everyone's cultures and beliefs are respected and able to live in harmony. It's just an unfortunate reality that not everyone feels the same way, 2,000 years ago or today. As a Medjay, Bayek reflects an older, sort of outdated for the time philosophy of helping people, of a simpler era of heroes and villains. It's sort of the modern day equivalent of a guy walking around claiming to be a knight errant. A black and white philosophy in a world of grey. And yet for most people, particularly in the side quests, that makes Bayek something of a symbol of light in a world of darkness. There's a huge range to the side quests you do. It's not all just killing people. My favourite are consistently the ones involving children, because Bayek loves kids. He's a man who was born to be a primary school teacher. One quest, when you first make it to Cyrene, has him just running around with the local kids doing some leaps of faith to show off to them. Particularly a kid called Ezio with an S, because we're not quite above being cute like that.
I will not forget this day, Bayek. We should honor it. I officially name you the Flea of Cyrene.
I will treasure it. Goodbye, Ezio. Stay out of trouble.
I can't promise, but I will try for you, Great Flea. I hope you get to hunt with your son again soon.
So do I, Ezio.
Another standout is when Bayek sees a woman on a ledge, contemplating whether to jump or not. Bayek spends a while just chatting with her. Her husband died to a scorpion sting, and now she feels as if she has nothing. So Bayek talks to her about grief and death and shares his own loss and pain. One line in particular speaks to what makes Bayek such a standout character in the series.
I must seem childish to you.
Believe me, no. I understand your grief.
That's why you knew what to say, isn't it? Did you lose someone too?
Many have lost loved ones to the Ptolemies.
Does it get better?
It gets better. But you will never be the same.
Origins is one of the most intricate and delicate explorations of grief that I've ever seen in a game, and I think this line really sums up why. The loss of his son doesn't fundamentally change Bayek as it might in some other stories. He loved kids before, and he still loves them after. He wanted to help people and protect them before, and he still does after. He loved to smile and be kind before, and he still does after. Life is for the living. Tragedy does not turn Bayek into a miserable, bitter asshole. He gets better, but he's never the same. A core part of him is broken. For a long time after the death of a loved one, feeling happy comes with an overwhelming sense of guilt. Like grief and sadness are the only emotions you're supposed to be feeling. That guilt comes out only every so often, but you can always feel it there. Abubakar Salim, the voice behind Bayek, delivers an absolutely masterful performance throughout the game, particularly when it comes to the subtlety of these emotions. When a line or an offhand remark reminds Bayek of his loss and his pain, it doesn't need to be stated, you can just hear it in the subtle inflections of his voice. But then on the other hand, no one delivers a hate-filled screed of rage and pain quite like Abubakar Salim can pull out.
I will destroy everything you stand for, Benedike, and I will destroy all others like you. But for now, all that matters is that you killed Shadia, and the last one you will remember is her name, Shadia!
The game is built to bring out these contrasts in Bayek, the extremes between the joy-filled primary school teacher and the rage-filled demon which lurks within. The hyena, kidnapping people in Giza in a flawed attempt to try and bring her own child back to life, where Bayek can offer sympathy, but no forgiveness. Or the crocodile who ends up murdering another child and doing the same to one of Bayek's allies that was done to him, perpetuating the grief even further. The most interesting and most memorable of the targets is the Scarab, Tahaka. Family man by day, cruel and vicious murderer by night. He's deliberately a dark reflection of Bayek, and this is even cemented by another great bit of casting because he is voiced by Tristan Dilala, the same guy who voiced Adewale back in Black Flag and Freedom Cry. Tahaka deprived Bayek of his son, and now Bayek deprives Tahaka's son of a father, a cycle going round and round.
I'll cut you down, like you did my father! I got you all, friend! I hate you!
Take care of him. Try to make him understand if you can.
The The game's relationship with the revenge is more complicated than the old eye for an eye mentality though, because it's equally tied up in Bayek's beliefs and his religion. It's not just that he's trying to avenge his son, he believes that his son's spirit cannot pass on to the afterlife until justice has been done. Until then, his spirit is stuck in limbo. It's an emotionally complicated twist on the traditional revenge format because it's not a belief that is ever proven wrong. In fact, as far as Bayek's concerned, he serves the gods and they all condone his actions. He will face the scales of Osiris with a light heart free of sin. A more traditional revenge story would not hit that note. The revenge would be self-destructive. Bayek would condemn himself to hell with his actions. But Bayek is absolutely assured in himself and the moral correctness of his actions. And naturally, it's that kind of total moral certainty that you need to start a cult that will last for the next 2,000 years. The other side of the equation is Aya. She also lost a son that day and equally bears the guilt and grief. But Aya has a slightly different reaction to the grief. She doesn't wear it nearly as openly as Bayek, and instead she tries to find meaning in it, tries to make herself a part of something bigger, which is why she falls so completely for the words of Cleopatra. Aya is not quite a dual protagonist on the same level as Jacob and Evie in Syndicate. Instead, she has only a few missions which are mostly used to tie more directly into the major historical events of the period in a more traditional Assassin's Creed sort of way. I want to talk about Aya, but unfortunately that means stepping away from the endless train of praise we've been on so far, because pretty much all of the shortcomings of Origins centre around Aya and her place and inclusion in the story. As revealed in the 2020 reports, Aya was supposed to be the main character of Assassin's Creed Origins. Bayek was going to die early on in the story, and Aya would take the leading role for the remainder of the game. This makes a lot of sense, because as revealed by the end of the game, Aya is Amunet, the legendary assassin first mentioned back in Assassin's Creed 2. Aya's playable missions often feel like you're playing a completely different game, and that's because you probably are. Whenever Aya takes the reins, the game makes a hard pivot from all the open RPG design into linear action adventure storytelling, much more in line with the previous Assassin's Creed games. The feeling from all of these missions is that they're missions that were already made before the pivot to Bayek was made. They didn't want to scrap them, so they're slotted very awkwardly back into the game in a way that totally messes with the pacing of the story. Around the 2/3 point of the story, after Bayek has returned from his 4 targets, you spend almost 2 full hours just playing as Aya in a completely linear sequence, covering the Siege of Alexandria, the death of Ptolemy, and Cleopatra's marriage to Caesar. It's total whiplash from the slow and steady pace of the rest of the game. Bayek is pretty much just a passenger along for the ride, and it all feels so rushed. I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, it's annoying for the obvious reasons. Aya was screwed over in exactly the same way Evie was last time, to appease sexist executives. On the other hand, based on the examples we have in the game, I do not think Origins with Aya in the lead role would have been nearly as good a game as the one we got. I do think that of the two of them, Bayek is more interesting, and from a non-sexist executive perspective, I can understand the impulse to focus on him more. Aya turns grief into purpose. She becomes one of Cleopatra's top agents and participates in a lot of very important historical missions, exactly like Connor, or Ezio, or any number of previous Assassin's Creed protagonists. She was there for the death of Pompey, she lit the signal fire at the Siege of Alexandria. All the Forrest Gumping through history we've come to expect from one of these games. She's also how the game reintroduces naval combat on ancient Greek triremes, with 50 archers lining the decks to simulate cannon fire in a way that really pushes believability to the limit. Aya is not a bad character, in fact she holds up half of the emotional weight of the game, but her game would have been a more traditional Assassin's Creed game, at least from what we see of it in the scraps that made it into this one. So in some sense, including these missions is better than nothing, because at least we still get to see some of what her game would have been like, as we inch closer and closer to actual female representation in this series. But on the other hand, they weaken the story of Origins as a whole with their weird and uncharacteristically sloppy inclusion. In scenes that include both Bayek and Aya, there feels like no particular justification for why Aya is the one in the reins, because we spend 95% of the game with Bayek. All of the open world, all of the side quests, all of the progression rests with Bayek. Aya feels out of place to be suddenly thrust into the spotlight after that. And it should be downplayed what a meaningful bit of representation Bayek is himself, considering the rather pale colour palette of the last 4 games. Bayek as an ethnically and culturally Egyptian man is a rarity amongst games in of itself. Origins does create a more progressive view of history than would be strictly accurate, but it does it in a much subtler way than Syndicate's egalitarian wonderland. One of the best little moments in the roller coaster that is the Siege of Alexandria is when Caesar won't give Aya the mission to light the signal fires because she's a woman. He'll only give it to Bayek, and then Bayek gives it to her anyway so she can prove him wrong.
Can't believe you trusted a woman to do something of such importance. How are the fleet to receive their orders?
Patience, Caesar.
The die is cast. Come, we go to the battlefield. Medjay, cover the retreat!
Many men have doubted Aya. All have found themselves dead by her blade.
It's a little moment that reflects a genuine clash of cultures at the time. Women in ancient Egypt had significantly more rights and a lot more cultural equality than their Greek or Roman counterparts. There probably wouldn't be many female warriors like Aya, as that would have been considered a man's job, but certainly there would not be the same biases of inferiority that someone like Caesar brings to the table. It's an extension of the belief in Ma'at, harmony and balance between all things, including the genders. Almost all of the Egyptian gods have a male and female aspect, used interchangeably depending on context. So sure, it is a bit of a cheesy girl power moment, but it's rooted in historical truths. When I first played the game, I really wasn't a fan of Aya, but I think that's just because I didn't properly understand her, and that's the fault of the game. Aya's story feels far too cut up to be properly effective. She lost a son just like Bayek did, but the game doesn't spend any time exploring her relationship with Khemu the way that it does with Bayek. Not only does he have the extended flashback, which weirdly Aya doesn't appear in at all, there's also the standing stones around the map representing various star signs. As you stargaze, Bayek remembers all the conversations he would have with his son as they used to stargaze together. All the day-to-day dad stuff, like how to know if you like a girl or worries about his future. Aya doesn't get anything like that, and so her grief and loss is harder to see in the game, and that can make her harder to understand. It wasn't really clear to me the first time around that Aya's obsession with helping Cleopatra is a manifestation of her own grief. Cleopatra gives her purpose, and purpose is the only thing keeping her from collapsing into a ball of sadness and pain. Aya is much more gung-ho in her support of Cleopatra than Bayek, and it starts to cause a rift between them as Bayek would prefer to be spending more time together. Aya's unwillingness to do so can feel unreasonable and annoying, but of course it's unreasonable. I understand that now, thinking about it more. Her son was murdered, and she's trying to make sense of a world where that happened, trying to find a cause that will make it mean something. If the game was going to include Aya's side of the story, I just wish it had included it more completely. Because Cleopatra isn't the real thing putting a strain on their relationship. Their son died, and as much as they try to comfort each other in that, try to be there for each other, and even try to go back to the way things were before between the two of them, they can't. Things won't ever be the same. It's a bitter and sad thing to watch unfold. They still love each other, but they can't be around each other anymore without being reminded of what's missing. And by the end of the game, they separate for good. It's the kind of breakup you don't often see reflected in media, not going out with a bang, but with a quiet conversation where both of them have already accepted that it's over.
I feel as though wherever we go, tragedy follows. Perhaps we should come to terms.
It is hard. I don't want to let go, but...
Every time I think of you, I think of Khemu, and everything we lost.
Me too. So for now, we kill.
Farewell, Aya.
This part of the third act really works because it matches up with the slow and steady pace of the rest of the game. It's everything else where the pacing just becomes more of a friendly suggestion. Cleopatra's betrayal is easy to see coming, and most of the earlier, or I suppose later assassins probably wouldn't have been fooled. But Bayek and Aya are both pretty naive and not exactly in a good emotional state to see through deception. Cleopatra does not care about their personal revenge quest or about balancing any sort of karmic scales. She cares about gaining the power to rule Egypt. Initially, she backs Pompey, but when he dies, she immediately pivots to Caesar. Loyalty is a tool that Cleopatra knows how to manipulate, and when Caesar doesn't want to execute one of his generals for being part of the Order of the Ancients, and instead promotes him to a position of power, it's clear where loyalty has gotten Bayek and Aya. All of this sets up a very clear villain, obviously. He's in the frame right now. That's right, it's this guy. This guy is the main final villain of Assassin's Creed Origins, and yes, this is literally how he's introduced, standing in the background. I can only imagine, based on the way everything is structured, that Caesar himself was supposed to be the final villain and head of the Order, considering that he did make himself an emperor and then quickly got assassinated. There's a lot of narrative crossover there, and we do see all of that, but that's the end of Aya's story. Bayek instead gets to deal with this guy, Caesar's right-hand man Flavius. The last act of the story is by far the weakest because of how rushed it all feels and how underdeveloped Flavius is as a villain. He's just an evil conqueror of the type we've seen 100 times before in this series, but not even with a distinct personality to back it up. The actual creation of the assassins also feels very rushed. After being betrayed and abandoned by Cleopatra, Bayek and Aya meet up with some friends and Bayek gives a pretty good speech about how the people need someone to fight for them. The only issue about this foundational scene of the assassins is that it's a table full of characters who you barely know. We have Aya's ship captain friend from the naval missions, he makes enough sense, but then we also have Aya's playwright cousin, who you help out on some side quests, the priest from Memphis, who thought he was cursed, and then Tahira the huntress, who only shows up in a side quest about killing some poachers. It feels like a completely arbitrary group of NPCs to make up the foundation of the assassins with. It could be any number of random side NPCs from the game so far and it would have made about as much sense. It could have been the lady on the ledge for all that it really matters. I get what the scene is going for. The real assassins were the friends we made along the way, but the rushed pacing of the third act doesn't give it the payoff it really needs to land properly. Thankfully, the roller coaster does finally stop and you get put back out into the open world again as you pursue Flavius up into the Roman Empire in the northwest of Egypt. Flavius is in possession of an Apple of Eden, the thing Khemu died for all the way back at the start of the game, and he's using it to cause chaos in his wake. Seeing the aftermath of the apple is an interesting use case, even if the guy using it is really underdeveloped. The open world becomes full of weird sights, people brainwashed into believing Flavius is a god, praying to him, talking about his greatness, painting the walls with his name in some crazed trance. And then, naturally, he uses it to have a wizard battle with you at the end, as is franchise tradition. The scene of finally killing Flavius is actually really good, because rather than focusing on Flavius, the focus is on Bayek and his reluctance to finish the job. Not out of mercy, but because once the revenge quest is over, his son is gone forever, his spirit released into the field of reeds. Killing Flavius means saying goodbye for the last time, and Bayek finds himself unable to do it. The scene where Bayek and Aya officially begin the Assassin Brotherhood, or as they call it, the Hidden Ones, is also a highlight, a great culmination of everything that has come before, and just a very rewarding scene for long-time fans of the series.
Egypt has fallen. Greece also. And Rome will fall too. All will fall to the creed, yet no one will know.
When we assassinate only those who deserve it. The few sick souls who try to control us. But they will never know who we are. Cold, calculated, poets of the kill.
I am fine with this. I am not a father anymore. I am not a husband. I am not a Medjay. I am a hidden one.
Yes. We are the Hidden Ones.
We sharpen our blades, pull what hope is left from this foul earth.
Lord Bayek of Siwa. What are you of now?
A new creed. Ours is finished.
Like the perfect ending to the game. Everything that has happened throughout the game contributes to what the assassins will become, why they do what they do, and the lessons they learn that lead to the core tenets of the creed. It's a perfect ending. It's just not actually the ending because there's an extra half an hour on top of that where Aya heads to Rome to finish off the very last target and kill Caesar as well for good measure. Once again, if the game was about Aya, then this would make sense as an ending, but since it isn't, it just feels very out of place to be ending the game with a character who clearly isn't the main character. She doesn't actually kill Cleopatra in the sequence, that won't happen for another several years, but she does officially take the name Amunet as to fully embrace her new life and new creed. It's also worth noting that there's a pretty significant several-year time skip here that must have happened at some point because there's 3 years between the Siege of Alexandria and the death of Caesar. It feels like the video game level equivalent of a post-credit scene. The story is already over, but here's a little extra for you anyway. Amazingly, I've gone this entire time without introducing the actual main character of the game, which I think really speaks volumes to the impacts of Layla Hassan and the modern-day aspect of Assassin's Creed Origins. Much like the very first game, the modern day was hidden from all of the marketing of Origins. Layla, as the new face of the modern day, wasn't revealed until the game came out, and even then it takes about 2 full hours before she actually shows up. But the thing about Layla is that she's boring. Actually, even more boring than Desmond, which is a truly incredible feat. She's an Abstergo researcher who's gone rogue to test out her new Animus technology that allows you to access the memories of people with just a DNA sample from the source. She's got her Animus set up in Bayek's tomb, with his mummy just in the other room. This is the explanation for how we can explore Bayek's memories even when he clearly has no descendants because his only son died. Aya as well, because as a married couple the two of them were buried together. That detail in itself is more interesting than anything that happens in Layla's story and speaks volumes to the complex relationship the two of them had. That even if they were separated and lived in entirely different countries for the remainder of their lives, they never officially got a divorce, which would have been allowed in ancient Egypt, and they still chose to be buried together in Siwa, in the cave where they used to play as children. That's great info to know. Everything else in Layla's story feels incredibly redundant. Like the very first game, it's setting up the connective tissue for the future games as Layla is marked for death by Abstergo, her friend over the radio is murdered, and finally William Miles makes a personal appearance to recruit her into the Assassins. Although to my great sadness they couldn't get John Delancey to come back. Layla goes through all of this without really defining a single reason why anyone should care about her story. She's an example of the reckless scientist type who cares more about her research than her own personal safety, and she never does anything to actually move beyond that basic archetype. Her sequences are also incredibly short, usually only 2 or 3 minutes apiece, which in a 100+ hour open world game means that they make up like 1% of the total game experience. It's easy to completely forget she exists every time she pops up again. While it's certainly more than the cutscenes of Unity and Syndicate, I'm not convinced we're over this idea of the modern day story as an obligation rather than as an actual creative choice. And in some sense that obligation is accurate. There is a sizable portion of the Assassin's Creed fanbase who cares about the modern day plot a lot more than I do, and was a lot more annoyed by its lackluster inclusion in the previous games. But I can't imagine that crowd was overly satisfied by Layla's story either, especially since it follows on from none of the Juno stuff that the previous games had been hinting at. The only part of the modern day story that does have some intrigue to it isn't even in the modern day portions of the game. Around the map, in the farthest reaches of the deserts are the oldest and deepest tombs or the even older ruins, the first civilization ruins. And within each of them is a pedestal that when activated plays a message. A message that's not intended for Bayek, but for Layla, or maybe even the player, depending on your interpretation. Just like Juno and Minerva of the earlier games, these precursors could see through time and talk into the future. These messages are the real meat for the lore junkies to chew on, full of deliberately ambiguous dialogue and philosophical ideas and potential foreshadowing for future games. It's the closest the games have gotten back to the corkboard conspiracies of Subject 16. Personally, my take on them is very meta. Several of the messages get into simulation theory, which I've had a lot of experience with recently, but within the context of a video game it becomes an especially interesting example because it's literally true. If we assume that these messages are to Layla, then they are flatly correct. She is in a simulation called Assassin's Creed Origins. She's using an Animus to see through the eyes of Bayek, and I'm using an Xbox to see through the eyes of her. The last one, specifically, talks about the potential of Layla's Animus to change the code, to change the simulation, and in doing so change reality, which is a very cryptic way of teasing and trying to justify the full story RPG mechanics that the future games would start to explore. While these sorts of cryptic messages can be entertaining, there is an obvious problem with them, which is that because each Assassin's Creed game is handled by a different team, there is absolutely no guarantee that any of this foreshadowing will actually go anywhere. One writer's weird ideas are not necessarily going to be picked up by the next person, and to my memory, Odyssey at least drops any pretense of simulation theory completely. What a Simulation Origins is though. Origins had extensive DLC support, including the kind of cosmetic slop we've come to expect from a Ubisoft game, as well as the same time-saver packs designed to prey on the people who don't have the time or energy to commit to the grinding required for the high-level gear crafting. Oh, and also whatever the hell this was. But it also had 2 of the most substantial DLC expansions in the series so far, each serving as a culmination for different aspects of the game. Before that though, there was another feature added to the game, Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour Ancient Egypt, an experience where the entire open world of Origins is stripped of combat and enemies to deliver a curated museum tour exploring the real history of ancient Egypt. This came free with the game, or you can buy it on your own if you want for $20. As an independent independent product, Discovery Tour is more or less a total failure, because what it really is a vanity project. There are 75 guided tours across the open world, and each of them only give the shallowest surface-level information about their subject matter, and naturally provide no sources for further reading, which makes their utility as an actual educational tool, which is what they're trying to sell it as, shaky at best. What it really feels like it's for is showing off. Like all of the games, a crapload of work went into the details of Origins, a breathtaking amount of research by actual historians and Egyptologists, not to create the story of the game, but to populate the open world, to make sure that a street on Alexandria not only looks the part, but feels the part, with the clothing of the people and the things that they're doing and the jobs that they're working on. The kind of research that goes completely unacknowledged by your average player is going to run right past those kinds of details without giving it a second thought. Let's take, for example, one of my favourite tours, the evolution of pottery in ancient Egypt. Now, you could not pay me to care about the evolution of pottery in ancient Egypt, nor could you possibly convince me to care in a 3-minute guided audio tour delivered with the charisma of a guy announcing departure times at a train station.
Pottery was essential to ancient Egyptians' daily lives. It was used in all aspects of life, from the storage of grains and liquids to containers within the tombs of necropolises. The most common pottery was made from Nile silt that resulted in a reddish-brown clay. Limestone clay, which made for more attractive pottery, was only found in Upper Egypt.
I don't give a shit, and you probably don't either, but you know who does? Some poor fucking historian who spent weeks or maybe months of their life studying ancient Egyptian pottery to make sure that this guy and his turn wheel looked as authentic as possible, along with the animators and artists and programmers who all worked to put it into the game world, all in a location so insignificant that it isn't even marked on the map. I call Discovery Tour a vanity project, and I don't even really mean that as an insult. It's genuinely impressive to see the amount of work and dedication put into the most minute details of Origins open world. I think the developers should get a chance to show off to the people who are interested. It's just that showing off how intricate your research was isn't really the same thing as actually educating people about those subjects. It gives me a greater appreciation for the video game Assassin's Creed Origins and all the work that went into making it. It doesn't really give me a greater sense of knowledge about ancient Egypt, or a greater appreciation for the actual history beyond what the base game already did, which is why releasing it on its own feels very weird. It's a proof of concept, really, and I think that the Discovery Tours of the next games expand on the concept in interesting ways. I think that using all of the research and work that goes into making these pristine recreations of historical times and places for something other than a game about stabbing people is a tremendous idea. I know that when I was a kid, something like this would have kept my attention a lot longer than a textbook about the same subjects. It's a difficult line to walk because the games themselves play around with history to meet the needs of the narrative and of open world game design. Merging that with what is meant to be an educational tool is a risk, and when they're presenting things as actual facts, that opens them up to a whole new line of attack. One that I can't follow because I'm not a historian. All I can do is take their facts about ancient Egyptian pottery at face value and assume they're not making it all up.
Our hero moves with the mist, as silent as the sea, delivering death. Unknown, unseen, ever unforgiving. Listen, let me tell you of him, the legend of Siwa, the shadow who is Bayek. Bayek, Bayek, Bayek. Bayek.
Sounds like quite a man.
The first of Origins' two major expansions is The Hidden Ones, which serves as an epilogue chapter for the main story, which also works to tie Origins more closely to the greater Assassin's Creed series. It's been many years since the events of the base game, and the Hidden Ones have been properly established as an organisation, but they've still got a few lessons left to learn. Tahira, now a proper assassin herself, is called back to Sinai, to the east of the base game, to deal with a new dangerous Roman threat. From a gameplay perspective, the Hidden Ones is more of the same and doesn't add more than a couple of new abilities to the skill tree. It's intended for maximum level players though, covering the level range of 40 to 45, so there is a focus on more difficult encounters designed to be tackled with your huge pile of top level gear. Sinai is a much more rocky and mountainous environment than most of the base games, so there's also a bigger focus on verticality in the level design than in the base game. But for the most part, the Hidden Ones is much more focused on narrative over anything else. This is Bayek in his Assassin's Creed Brotherhood era, and he gets a new outfit to match, and what a look it is! The perfect mesh between his Egyptian heritage and the precursor to Altair's outfit 1,000 years down the road. Bayek's schoolteacher personality makes him a perfect mentor figure, sharing his wisdom and knowledge with confidence and surety in his beliefs. But that's not to say he's never wrong. For one thing, the DLC reveals what we the players already know, that the Order of Ancients did not die with Flavius, the Order is eternal. This is both literally true, the Order survives into the modern day, becoming the Templars and then Abstergo. But it's also just broadly true, there will always be people who seek the power to control others, and the Hidden Ones will need to be equally as long-lasting to fight against them. Another lesson to learn is about trust and secrecy, one that can be so easy to forget. The Hidden Ones have become something of a local legend, as demonstrated by the old man singing songs in the intro. People around Sinai know who they are. They're the local do-gooders with the strange hoods. But that level of publicity comes at a cost. It makes you an easy target, which they learn the hard way when the Bureau is firebombed and Bayek ends up crucified. Thus we get the third tenet of the Creed, never compromise the Brotherhood. It's not just a matter of secrecy, it's essential to the survival of the Brotherhood that they remain unknown, a secret organisation first and foremost. For similar reasons we pick up the second tenet, hide in plain sight. Spectacle makes you noteworthy, you should be subtle, go unnoticed walking down the street. Frankly, I think every assassin, including Bayek, is terrible at that, they all accessorise far too much, but still, the idea is solid. Bayek is saved from crucifixion by the timely arrival of Amunet, and just as the end of the base game implied, their relationship is delightfully complicated. They're not so cold with each other as they were at the end of the game. It's been a long time since Camus now, and they're both more at peace with his loss than they were during the main game. For the most part, they keep up a professional friendliness with each other, and if the conversation ever dips into flirting, they're quick to pull away. Aya's life is in Rome now. They've established duties for themselves where being together is no longer a viable option even if they wanted to. But deep down, the love is still there, and as always you can hear it through Abubakar Salim's expert vocal performance.
Tell me of your life in Rome.
It's a marvelous place, full of intrigue, deceit, and corruption. The perfect city for a hidden one.
Ha! I expected you to talk about the wine.
The wine is very good. You should come visit sometime. We'll have a taste.
I might do that.
The fire claims to Hira, and in retribution, Bayek manages to kill the local order leader, but he's not the true final boss. One of the Hidden One's main allies in the region is a rebel leader called Gamalat. He's a classic, charismatic leader with big talk and big ideas, a local legend and inspiration to the people. But as it turns out, he's also dangerous. Gamalat has recruitment methods for his rebellion which are less than ideal. He provokes the local Romans and hides amongst the local populace, knowing well how the Romans will retaliate. But he lets it happen because it creates martyrs and new recruits, sons and fathers with a newfound passion for killing Romans, the perfect soldiers for his army. It's a complicated philosophical challenge for the Hidden Ones to face. Gamalat fights in the name of peace, but his methods are severe, and the result is the deaths of many innocent people. And as the protector of the people first and foremost, that's not something that can really be tolerated. Thus comes the first and most important tenet of the Creed: stay your blade from the flesh of the innocent. Freedom cannot come at the expense of those lives that you're supposed to protect. You have to find a better way. In his death, Gamalat even agrees with the sentiment, accepts his death, and hopes that the Hidden Ones will live on forever. The base game showed us the origins of the organisation, but the Hidden Ones DLC is about showing the origins of the doctrine, and I think in that more specific field it does a great job, along with just being a solid extra few hours of the great gameplay loop of the base game. As Bayek and Aya part for the last time, they talk about what they've done, wonder if they're really on the right path, to which Aya assures Bayek that they are, and then, just for a brief moment, they let their true emotions out, press their heads together and let it all flow out. There's no music, just the sound of their heavy breathing until they walk away and don't look back. It's a really amazing moment of non-verbal storytelling, the kind that wouldn't really be effective in the earlier generation games without the high level of visual fidelity, particularly in small facial details that this game has. A moment where 1,000 lines of dialogue couldn't possibly convey all the things they want to say to each other. This is their last moment together, potentially forever, and this moment says so much more than any words or even a kiss goodbye really could. The DLC comes with its own host of new side quests as well, like recruiting new members into the Hidden Ones or uncovering some ancient treasures of the Sinai, but one of the most interesting is also the thing you're likely to do last in the DLC. There are some high-level bounty hunters after you wandering around the map, dangerous opponents that you can't even really take on until you're high enough level to fight them. But once you do, you can route them back to their boss, Kawab, son of Tahaka, come to avenge his father's death just like he said he would, just as Bayek avenged his son's death all those years ago. The cycle of revenge is infinite, but Kawab and Bayek have a chance to end it here and now. So after Bayek beats him, he offers Kawab a choice. He can die in the desert like his dad, or he can join the Hidden Ones, and work together to make a world where these sorts of tragedies don't happen anymore. He chooses to join, and the two just sit for a while in the desert. The DLC already had a good ending, but as a final little send-off, this is a great beat to hit too, another loose end from the base game all neatly wrapped up.
Bayek, I do not send you greetings, but a warning. 4 years have passed since we laid the last to rest, but the Creed spurs us ever onwards. I have captured a messenger bearing news of another artifact, this time in Upper Egypt.
Where the Hidden One serves as a narrative climax, the second DLC expansion, Curse of the Pharaohs, is instead a gameplay and exploration climax, serving a more traditional video game role where narrative takes a backseat to the loops of combat, stealth, and exploration. It's also twice the size of the Hidden Ones, covering the level range of 45 to 55, bringing it to around the scale of Assassin's Creed Liberation, an entire spin-off game bolted onto the end of Origins. Curse of the Pharaohs takes Bayek to a very obvious omission from the base game, the one other major landmark in Egypt that people know aside from the pyramids and the Sphinx, and that's the Valley of the Kings, where all the pharaohs got buried after they realised committing to pyramids every time was a bit excessive. And the place where Europe inherited its fascination with ancient Egypt and also nicking a bunch of their historical artifacts with the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. The valley is geographically right across the river from Thebes, one of the largest cities of the era and another obvious omission from the base game, although it's clear now that they were just being saved for this DLC. Curse of the Pharaohs is a rather controversial point in the series though, because as we learn right away, magic is real. An ancient mummy comes to life in a magic sand tornado and attacks you as soon as you get off the boat. There is an in-universe explanation for this, like you've probably already guessed, it's more magic ball drama, but there is something quite different about the way it's all presented this time around. Instead of using the weird sci-fi aesthetics that the Pieces of Eden usually resort to, the focus this time is on an actual magic aesthetic leaning into Egyptian mythology. While Thebes and the surrounding area is a massive new chunk of open world, it's also not the star of the show. After so long exploring the rest of Egypt, Thebes is nice, but it's starting to get a little bit samey by this point. As you investigate the source of the curse bringing these long-dead pharaohs back to haunt the living, you end up investigating their tombs, and eventually passing through a crack in reality into the Egyptian afterlife. Each pharaoh resides in a different part of the afterlife, and each of these 4 locations are some of the coolest and most unique places in the entire series. Aru, the Field of Reeds, is the most iconic version of the Egyptian afterlife, and it is portrayed gorgeously in this game. Exactly the Edenic paradise one would imagine as an eternal reward. It might seem insanely jarring to go from regular historical Egypt to this magical fantasy realm, but what makes it work is a combination of 2 things. The first is that from a gameplay perspective, nothing actually changes. You might be sneaking around stabbing the servants of Anubis, but you're still sneaking around and stabbing people in the same way you've been doing throughout the whole game. So mechanically, the whole thing is entirely consistent, with each afterlife serving as its own mini open world. The second is that the same care and attention to detail that goes into the portrayal of real places is put into the depiction of these mythical places. The Gardens of Aten is one of the most interesting from a mythological perspective because it's the realm of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who tried to replace the Egyptian pantheon of gods with the worship of a single god, Aten, the sun god, and as soon as you enter the gardens you're hit with that very sun god looking exactly as Akhenaten had always portrayed it with the rays pointing across the land. My favourite of the 4 is probably Hebsed, the domain of Ramses II, because it's a perfectly weird adaptation of the poem Ozymandias, which is about Ramses II. I met a traveller from an antique land who said 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions red which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal the words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, you mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sand stretch far away. an endless desert of half-sunk statues and battlefields where the locations you explore are themselves events like the Battle of Kadesh. The fantasy genre is almost entirely rooted in European folklore, so seeing a AAA budget being used to bring the myths of an entirely different culture to life is absolutely enthralling. From the outside looking in, it might also seem like a massive break in the historical authenticity of the series, but that's because we come from a culture where these things aren't real. Not many people today still believe in the Field of Reeds, but Bayek does, and his idea of what these places look like is exactly what makes them real. Like with the base game, we experience all of this through the lens of Bayek, and Bayek is shockingly casual about all of this. He isn't surprised to discover that the afterlife is real because he finds everything in there exactly like he always thought it would be. It's as common knowledge to him as the layout of New York City is to us, even if we've never been there personally. Because to him, these places are real and always have been. This is pushing the Apple of Eden pretty far past its usual abilities to control people's minds. And for a lot of the DLC, it's left ambiguous how much of it is real and how much of it is just a hallucination, or a visualization of things that aren't really happening in reality. Some things are definitely real, like the mummies attacking people because everyone can see them and get murdered by them. Bayek's journeys into the afterlife are a lot more up to interpretation. Bayek himself mentions that he's pretty sure he didn't literally enter the afterlife, but some sort of recreation of them, akin to the alternate reality Connor went to back in the Tyranny of King Washington. That doesn't explain how he can pick stuff up in there, like magic swords, and bring them back into the real world. The only explanation for that particular detail is because video game. For me, this is enough of a justification to enjoy the afterlives as presented in this game. For a lot of cultures throughout history, like the ancient Egyptians, mythology is equally as important to a full understanding of the time period as the actual history is. This is just a much more visually interesting and engaging way of exploring that side of things than reading a database entry about it, or whatever other non-interactive way you would have to engage with it in a game that stayed more completely true to facts and history. From a pure game design perspective, this embracing of magic and mythology allows for much more climactic boss fights against the 4 resurrected pharaohs, where instead of just fighting some big guy with a shield, you're fighting against these magical beings with unique and special abilities, presenting a challenge different from anything else in the game, and also really difficult. Even turning down the difficulty to easy, each of them took me a good few tries. It's kind of hard to go back to a narrative in the real world after experiencing the wonders of the afterlife. There is one, and it's pretty long too, with lots of intrigue and the like, but it's really just the connective tissue to get you into these afterlives. Turns out it was the High Priestess who started the curse because tomb robbers murdered her mum when she was a kid. Good to know, not really important in the grand scheme of the DLC and its legacy. The most interesting storytelling is done in the afterlives anyway, since they are technically creations of Bayek's own imagination and belief. The side quests within the afterlife take on a pretty interesting aspect because they're quests that Bayek is creating for himself, and conversations he's having with himself. This could be interpreted on your own, but there is an NPC who will explain it all to you at the end in case there was any doubt left. In the Field of Reeds, he finds a man separated from his wife in the afterlife because his wife was put onto the service of Anubis, so Bayek releases her so the two can be together. This is reflective of his own relationship with Aya. They're separated in life, sworn to service, but he takes great comfort in the thought that they will be together again forever in the afterlife. In the Gardens of Aten, he worries about his own relationship with the gods, if he's as heretical as the heretic pharaoh, to which he assures himself of his own faithfulness. In Hebsed, he ruminates on Khemu and his lost relationship with his son, embodied by the young son of Ramses who wishes to be a scholar instead of a soldier. And in the Duat, the realm of Tutankhamun, he wonders about his own place in the afterlife, if his heart will be pure when he finally reaches the scales, to which he reminds himself of what an unworthy soul actually looks like in the form of one of the Order of Ancients trying to cheat the system. It's a very cerebral form of storytelling, and I really wish they didn't have the guy at the end spell it out to you what it all meant, but I suppose not everyone is a big brain boy like me. Narratively, there's really nothing climactic about Curse of the Pharaohs, it's just an adventure in Bayek's ever-growing list of adventures. In fact, from a pure narrative perspective, it would probably make more sense to come before the hidden ones, but then you would end up with a strange de-escalation in the encounter design. It's not my favourite DLC in the series, especially compared to the base game. It is very rough around the edges, with a lot more bugs that never quite got fixed, but it's certainly one of the most interesting and ambitious, and established a whole new pattern for the series going forward. An avenue of mythology to explore in a way the series had never really tackled before then. Some people really don't like that and see it as a betrayal of what the franchise is supposed to be, but I think that cordoning it off into the DLC and keeping the loosest of connections to the good old Apples of Eden is enough for me to accept a weird and different direction for the series, especially when the end result is some very, very pretty screenshots. Origins was all about reinventing what Assassin's Creed could mean. Ironically, and going further back than they ever had before, they were trying to bring the franchise into the modern day. Push the medium forward like they attempted to do back with the very first game, and other than some shortcomings with character development and pacing, I think they did a pretty bang-up job. It's something that's quite remarkable about the Assassin's Creed series. Its survival and continued relevance is really down to its ability to continually reinvent itself. Because its core premise is so inherently malleable, as long as you're running around in historical settings, making history your playground, everything else can change. The game design, the level design, the narrative, it's all malleable under that core premise. Origins is one of the most requested games to get a sequel, and as much as I would love to spend more time with Bayek, I don't really think it needs one. It's an entire story contained within itself, a saga as big as the Ezio trilogy condensed into one gigantic game. And unfortunately for me, they only get bigger from here. Because for how malleable the franchise is, for some people there is a line, and where Origins was teetering on that line, the next game in the series trips right over it for a lot of people. But that's a story for another day.
May your victories multiply.
Papa? Jump.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here, or just support the things that I do, then please consider signing up. It would mean a lot to me. As well as a like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell, because there's an eagle circling overhead and I don't trust it. I think it's staring at me. If you want to see my entire Assassin's Creed series critique, then you can find that in this playlist up here. We're in the endgame now, but unfortunately in terms of runtime, I'm pretty sure we're only at the halfway point. Or, for something very different, I recently participated in a 48-hour video essay jam where we each had 48 hours to make a video based on the theme of Journey. So to find all of those wonderful videos, you can find them in this playlist down here.